heart is a very mysterious organ, it seems to me. Now, we're not here tonight to do any kind of a forum on your insides, but poets and songwriters have written about and sung about the heart for a long time. But from a medical point of view, the heart is a vast, new, pioneering thing, it seems to me. I'm Milton Metz. On behalf of Bywords, I welcome you to our program here in Louisville, and especially so to our distinguished guest, Dr. Allan Lansing, nationally known cardiovascular surgeon. Dr. Lansing, we can't very well do a forum, as I said, on the medical aspect, but why has the heart throughout the ages been so popular with songwriters and poets? They say, I've broken my heart, or my heart is bursting with pride. Yet it's another very important part of your organ, but it looks, you know, it looks like anything else.
Well, it's the drive system that keeps all the rest of the organs functioning. Without this motor to drive the blood and the oxygen around the body, all the rest of the organs would deteriorate. So it's really the center of all motion, the head being the center of the soul, I guess, and the mind. But
I mean, if you've got a good head, you can't fall in love with somebody unless you've got a good heart to pump it up
absolutely.
there. But for, you know, I've read about medical procedures, you know, in the Civil War and way back in centuries gone by, where they would, when people went to war, they would remove bullets or wounds from daggers and swords. Nobody ever tampered with a heart until recent times because of its mystery and in its complexity.
Well, partly that, but when we opened the chest wall centuries ago, the lung would collapse, and so everything seemed to fall apart. So it was almost a natural barrier to keep you away from the heart. And then when you touch the heart, it tends to jump and skitter, and its beat may become irregular, and this would frighten the individuals, thinking that the heart was going to stop. So it wasn't until sort of modern anesthesia and understanding of lung function that we could enter the chest cavity and actually handle the heart. And all of the first operation on the heart, where a surgeon attempted to open up a heart valve, was in 1929. The patient died sometime after, and then nothing happened for another 10 years. And even then, people didn't try to enter into the heart, probably till in the early 50s. Their operations were outside the heart on congenital heart conditions, but actually going into the heart and trying to correct things really didn't happen again until the early 1950s.
Now, one hears the word bypass surgery. Mm-hmm. It's a common occurrence.
Every day.
And it's almost a status symbol. But it is a surgical procedure, I presume, that has saved and prolonged thousands of lives?
There's no question about that. There's a great deal of controversy in newspapers and reports saying that there's no need for this operation, there are too many of them done, that it doesn't really help anybody. If you read the reports carefully, you'll find that the patients that are studied in these controlled studies are not the patients we operate on anyway. They're patients who have stable angina, they get along well for months or years with no change. Excluded from that study were the people whose angina was getting worse or was very severe or incapacitating, or who had certain threatening types of lesion, or people with heart failure, or people with anything else wrong with them. They were kept out of the study.
The system, what, had defects in it, you mean?
No, it was an excellent study, but it is misinterpreted as saying that you can do just as well with medicine as with surgery. Yes, you can in this small select group of people, but for everybody else who is incapacitated, then the surgical procedure is a very beneficial one, and that's why it's so popular.
Yes, that's what I mean. That system has a defect, and that's why surgery is called for, or medicine, whatever.
Yes, right.
Well, you might have, your artery might be blocked in some way, or have weak walls or something, and this kind of thing is a very recent procedure that has been developed.
Yes, it is. It probably started around, first one around 1964, but then very few were done until the early 70s, and now it's hundreds of them done every day because it has been so successful in relieving the angina and in prolonging life.
In all due modesty, you would have to admit, Dr. Lansing, that the heart surgeon is the star performer of the medical world.
Perhaps at the moment, but all fields of medicine have periods of of ascendancy and others when they are not so popular. Neurosurgery used to be. And I think the field of transplantation is now becoming an area that is rising once again in ascendancy with the new forms of immunosuppression.
Well, what you're saying is that the ultimate is taking out a sick heart and replacing it with an artificial mechanism that will make you virtually as good as new.
Yes, that would be the ideal. We're not any place near that yet, but we're working on it.
It's within the realm of man's possibility?
Oh, very much so. There are two ways to replace a heart at the present time. The one is with a transplant, that is taking a heart from an individual who has just died and implanting it in place of your own heart, which is diseased and not functioning. Transplants are now very successful because of the new drugs to try to control rejection. Highly successful. Now we see more and more heart transplants being done. However, there are very few donor organs available compared to the total number of people that would need such a thing, and that's why we're working on the mechanical devices. And I go out to Utah about every 6 weeks to work with the group that worked with Barney Clark,
Right.
to implant an artificial heart in a calf on each of 2 days. And then when we come back to Louisville, we are following the progress of those calves by a computer with a telephone monitoring of the blood pressure and the function of the chambers in the artificial heart. So that type of research is going on all the time and really is, I think, very close to being successful.
Well, as I recall the Barney Clark case, he had a good deal of equipment that was necessary to support the artificial heart. I presume that steps have improved so that the equipment is much less bulky today?
Yes, the drive system that is presently available to drive the heart is external, but it is small enough that it can be carried around over your shoulder like a camera case. Weighs about 10 pounds and is about the size of a camera case. And with that, you are mobile and able to move around, and they are now working on an electro-hydraulic pump, which has a motor about the size of the end of my thumb that drives fluid back and forth between the chambers of the artificial heart. And that is driven by a single wire coming through the skin surface with direct current type of battery that you could wear around the waist. And very shortly, instead of anything on the surface, there would be an induction coil underneath the skin, and you just would carry your battery power over top.
Sounds like science fiction.
It is. It's very exciting to see it now. It's as discouraging as the first days of open heart surgery right now. But I feel quite confident that 10 years from now it will not be. It'll be like our heart valves, where you'll have different models. There'll be some that come from Japan and some from Germany, and as well as American, and you'll have different models to perform different functions.
Say you had a bad ticker. Ideally, from a medical point of view, would it be better to get someone else's heart or an artificial implant?
Right today, someone else's heart is obviously better. Almost 80% of the patients who receive a heart transplant now are alive a year later and functioning well, and the length of survival after this is steadily improving. It's not perfect, though. You still may develop side effects of the drugs. The organ that you put in gets attacked by the very disease process that you had before, the arteriosclerosis or whatever. So it is not perfect, but today, at this moment, the transplant is infinitely superior to a mechanical heart.
I spoke a moment ago of science fiction. I hope you won't think this is a stupid question, but if you get someone else's heart in you, do you in any way assume any of their characteristics, physically or otherwise?
No. No, you don't.
It's your own system.
Right. And as a matter of fact, it's possible that the cells of that heart may actually start to take on the characteristics of your body, that is, the immune covering or surface of them. And if this happens over a period of time, you reach a stage of tolerance where your body has accepted this. I liken it to getting along with your mother-in-law. You see, she may move in with you, and eventually you get used to it, and it doesn't bother you as much as when it first was put in there.
She hasn't changed, but you have. Your
Right, exactly.
That's a very apt expression. What is your particular interest? In the whole cardiovascular system?
Yes, I work about 85% of the time on the heart itself, but I also do surgery on major blood vessels that have become diseased or blocked or have aneurysms. And for many years did the kidney transplants here in Louisville. Started the program almost 20 years ago and have been associated with it ever since.
If you don't mind a personal remark, Dr. Lansing, I've known you for some time. I find your face particularly unmarked by stress, and it would seem to me that being a cardiovascular surgeon is a very stressful job. Now, how do you deal with that?
I have a very good plastic surgeon that I see every.
He takes the lines out of your
That's
face.
right.
Very good.
No, I really don't know the answer to that. I do worry a lot about the patients, and there's a lot of stress in the operating room. And I have been blessed, I think, with genes that kept me from developing high blood pressure or ulcers. It's the response to the stress that I think determines what happens to you. And
it is stressful, though, isn't
oh,
it?
yes,
Even though
but
you're as skilled a man as there is in the country, there's still pressures on you.
Great deal. Every time that you're in the operating room, you're aware that a major catastrophe can occur. There isn't anything that I do that does not involve someone's life or limb or disability if it doesn't go right. And so no matter how simple the procedure, there's a great deal of concern. Now, I've been very fortunate over the years to have gathered around me an excellent crew of assistants and pump technicians and associates who take a great deal of the strain and load off because everything runs so smoothly, so automatically, that these problems don't arise.
Your team is how big?
We have about 40 people,
Wow.
just in our own office and hospital staff.
But in any given operation, how many are?
Usually someplace between 12 and 14 in the operating room at any one time.
And an operation, I know you can't tell me a specific time, but how long?
Usually someplace between 2 and at the most 2.5 hours.
At intense concentration.
The most intense concentration is when you're actually hooked up to the heart-lung machine and the heart is stopped and you're trying to fix things and then get it going again. That part would be someplace between 40 and 60 minutes usually, sometimes an hour and a half.
Alan, about you yourself, I know that you graduated magna cum laude. Did you expect much of yourself at that time?
No, I really didn't. I got into medical school not really even knowing what a doctor did. It was just the hardest course to get into, so I decided that there must be something good there. And then when I finished medical school, I had to choose between internal medicine and surgery, and they took 8 people a year in internal medicine and only 1 in surgery, so again I figured that must be the best thing to go to, and that's how I got into surgery. And I got into heart surgery accidentally after I had left Canada and was training in Chicago, and just sort of happened to fall in with evil company and ended up in heart surgery. So it was always the things that were the most difficult. Nothing was planned, though. I didn't know where I was going to be. I came to Louisville and didn't even know where Louisville was when I was invited to come here. So,
You have some interesting views on what causes heart trouble. I once read a column by a medical man who had been a doctor emeritus at Mayo's. And somebody once wrote him, remember those medical columns?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That appear in some newspapers? Said, Dear I think Dr. Alvarez, how do you get to live a long life? And Dr. Alvarez's answer was, the best way to live a long life is to have parents who have lived long lives, which I suspect there is a great deal of truth to. But what can one do you say, Dr. Lansing, to ensure a healthier life from a cardiovascular system, in eating and exercising and living? Or is there nothing you can do other than what you do anyway?
I think Dr. Alvarez was absolutely right when he said that is the #1 factor in not only the length of life, but how healthy you be. We can't do anything about that. Everything else, I think the Greeks had summarized and said everything in moderation. That exercise may be beneficial. I don't particularly, as you know, believe in exercise as a form of therapy. That is, in order to improve your heart or lower your pulse rate or save your coronaries. I do believe in exercise, though, because of the relaxation that it gives you, the fact that it takes you away from the telephone, away from the stress, distracts your mind as well as your body. And so, yes, exercise and relaxation are important. As far as diet's concerned, again, moderation in anything. We heard a lot about cholesterol. We're hearing less about that now. And we're hearing about sugar, and we're hearing about salt.
Yes.
I think that if you run your motor too hard, too fast, never get a chance to cool off, then you are going to produce damage to the mechanism. And so I think that...
What do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, I'm talking, okay, so you eat too much, you smoke too much, you drink too much, you stay up too late, and you never, or you work all the time. I'm a bad one to talk about that. But you work all the time and can never really relax. And those are the things I think you have to learn to work hard for excellence so you get satisfaction out of the quality. But you must also be able to turn it off and relax and get away from it, or you'll burn your motor out.
You have a word about jogging, haven't you, Dr. Lansing?
Well, you've heard that I am not an enthusiastic jogger because of the painful look on the faces of everybody you see running down the road. However, I have friends who love to jog and friends who love to run, and they feel better because of it, and I don't argue with them. As long as they enjoy it and they feel better, they should do it, because the rest of them will do better because of it. But there isn't, I'm afraid, any evidence that it really makes any difference in whether you'll have a heart attack or not, or if you have one, whether you'll survive or not. I don't think
There's no evidence on that?
No, none at all. Now, there are biochemical changes that have been demonstrated, which by inference might suggest that this would have some effect in the future, that is, changes in the lipids associated with exercise or drinking beer.
Right.
But there isn't any evidence that it makes any difference as far as statistically, whether you have a heart attack or whether you'll survive one.
You like glazed donuts, hamburgers, pizza, chili, the so-called, and that's not my word for it because I find them pretty good, junk foods. Is that bad for you from your cardiovascular
Well,
point of view?
you're getting away from, really shouldn't be answering these questions. I'm a surgeon, you know, I'm a plumber, I'm not a dietitian. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these things in moderation. If you lived off one of them,
yes,
or two of them, then obviously you're going to produce an imbalance. But there certainly is a good deal of nutrition in all of those junk foods.
You have four things in great supply, more than most people. Great talent, many honors, big fame, and presumably a lot of money. How do you feel about that? How do you live with that?
Well, first of all, I've said many times that I thank the Lord for the talent that He gave me. I thank the people of Kentucky for the opportunity to be here and to use that talent. After this, I am embarrassed by the fact that I do something that I like to do, I do fairly well, and I do get paid for it and do make a significant amount of money. As a result of that, with my wife, we are trying to give something back to the community that has been so kind to us. We established or endowed the School of Nursing at Bellarmine College, trying to give something back to the community, and we expect to do the same thing in other areas in the future, so that, yes, I've been very fortunate, but no, I'm not selfish. I spend almost nothing really on myself.
Do you not have an indulgence?
Not really. I drive the same car for years, and I don't have one of the big fancy European cars, and I really don't have clothes. Don't really particularly interest me. My wife buys all my clothes. I never get in the store, so that her taste is better than mine, and I don't really have any interest in that. So that no, I don't have any indulgence. We don't have a boat. I do like to swim. We do happen to have a swimming pool now. but that's about all.
There is a tendency, Dr. Lansing, for people, many of us, to imbue people like you with certain, for lack of a better word, godlike qualities. Because as you said yourself a moment ago, you're dealing every day, almost every minute, with life and death circumstances on the operating table. And it is a very heavy burden of responsibility. On the other hand, people who have undergone Dr. Lansing surgery must always have you in their heart. And that puts you in a special place with many people, not unlike perhaps their religious leaders.
Yes, you're quite right. It can be embarrassing at times, and also you have to be very careful that you don't start to believe it yourself, because it would be very easy when you go to a meeting or speak to a group of people, and people are very enthusiastic about what you've done, that you start thinking you're something special. About that time, something will go wrong in the operating room, or there'll be some problem arise, and you're brought back down to earth, and you realize that you are just an ordinary individual, that you are a mechanic, that you do have a certain skill, like the piano player or a violinist or something like this, but it's only a human ability. You inherited it. You may have worked hard to improve it, but if you didn't start with something a little special, you really couldn't end up special. For instance, I've said, no matter how hard I tried, I could never high jump 7 feet, and I could practice all I liked, but I'd never be a 7-foot high jumper. And no matter how hard I practiced tennis, and I used to be moderately good, I would never be able to compete with any professional tennis player, because I just don't have the physical characteristics to do that. I happen to have had certain mental characteristics and physical characteristics, certain attitude and a tremendous devotion to hard work and detail that allowed me to do the kind of work I'm in well. And I have been fortunate enough to find out what I could do well and stay with it. I don't try to do other things. For instance, when I was full-time with the university, I had several chances to be a chairman of the Department of Surgery. This required a significant amount of administrative time and responsibility. And I felt that that wasn't what I was really good at. I was good at talking to people, touching them, and doing the mechanical things and supporting them and their families through a period of crisis. As an administrator, there are many other people who could do administration better than me, and I didn't like to sit in meetings and just go through these things, so I said, I'm not going to do it. It was not what I was good at. So my success is only that I've sort of found what I'm good at, and I keep practicing that.
You speak of talking to people, and that intrigues me, because it seems to me that many people come to the operating room for heart or bypass surgery with great trepidation and fear. And it would seem to me that you and your team have devoted thought to what you can tell these people to set their minds at rest, right?
Well, absolutely. That's a very, very important part of what our team does and what I try to do. I'm a great believer in the whole field of touch. I don't mean I have to physically touch you like this, right, but I may touch you just by looking in your eyes, by speaking to you, by listening to you, by being in the same room with you. And I know there's a certain force that goes back and forth, and I know I can make people feel better just by being with them and talking to them. And I can then, when they go to the operating room, they are more relaxed, and they're less likely to have abnormalities of heart rhythms and problems. People who are extremely tense and worried and upset, their adrenaline, all their nervous system is fired up, and they're much more likely to have a problem or a catastrophe occur. So that whole area of what you say to people, how you relate to them, is an extremely important part of surgery, although most people would think of surgery as just the mechanical aspect.
So you see that really as important and a preparatory step.
Absolutely, and afterwards. You can go by and people will just be lying there, miserable, barely able to get up and frowning, expecting the worst to happen. And you can do the same thing at that stage. You can give them strength, encouragement, enthusiasm, have them smile, or even if they get mad at me, it doesn't matter, as long as there's some response and that they get up and say, I'm going to show that so-and-so. That is a very, very important part of the practice of medicine, one that's never taught anyplace.
With the increase of the knowledge in medicine and in cardiovascular surgery and all that, do you ever have any doubts about the longevity of people today, that we may outlive our own usefulness and ability to pursue happiness?
Yes, I think we're already seeing it, not because of surgery, but because
Yes.
of the control of infectious diseases particularly, that people are living to a point where their minds go. The body is still there, but it's just a shell, and that's the very worrisome part of all of life. I don't know what the answer to that is. I wouldn't pretend to be someone who could solve that problem. One would hope that we would be able to keep people's minds alert longer and longer, that we will learn. That's one of the last places that we really haven't been as far as medicine's concerned. We really haven't been inside the brain. There's a lot of research on it, but we really don't know what wears out or why things wear out. Certainly that's worrisome, but I've got enough troubles just learning to put in a mechanical heart.
How do you regard your own mortality? Do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm more aware of it in the last 2 or 3 years than I ever was before. When you get past a certain age, then all at once you realize that life isn't just indefinite. It's not going to go on forever. I, however, have sort of thought, well, if something were to happen to me tomorrow, I've had a wonderful life, and I wouldn't be able to grumble or complain that, gosh, I should have had another 20 years. Because I've probably had more good experiences, more opportunities, and more benefits in the time that I've already had than most people can ever hope to have. So I can't grumble if something happens to me tomorrow. So I don't think very much now seriously about worrying, gosh, am I going to be around next year or the year after? I plan everything on the basis that I will be here at least for another 10 years. But if it doesn't happen, okay.
What a legacy you will have left. I didn't mean to leave us on a sad note, but an optimistic, we'll take it in terms of at least 20 years. Thank you very much, Dr. Lansing. Milton Metz for Bywords with my guest, the distinguished nationally known cardiovascular surgeon who resides in Louisville but is known all over, Dr. Allan Lansing. Thank you very much on behalf of KET and Bywords. Good night.